feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie podcast. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
We're talking about it, Matt. Taskmaster all the time.
It's what the people have wanted. Taskmaster 2. I mean, this kind of is a Black Widow sequel, if I'm being completely honest. And we will get into that because today we are reviewing Jake Schreier's The Thunderbolts, starring Florence Pugh, Sebastian Stan, Wyatt Russell, Olga Kurylenko, Louis Pullman, David Harbour, JLD, and more. Hannah John-Kamen, Geraldine Viswanathan, as well as more. Eric, how are you on this very Taskmaster afternoon?
Well, Matt, we're talking Taskmaster. What else is there? There's nothing else that's needed. We're doing it. At last, we finally get a full feature that has Taskmaster in it.
Before we get into things, this is a spoiler-free review of Thunderbolts. So we will be covering things that have been in the marketing and certain things that we're also going to be covering the press conference that Eric and I attended digitally. So if you don't want to know anything about the movie or don't know anything about the movie, maybe bounce out and you can come back to this when you've seen it. But we are going to do our best to not spoil any major plot points, any reveals, anything like that. So anything that was kind of in the trailers is fair game. There are certain things with who the antagonist of the film is, some things like that have been revealed in trailers, especially some of the later ones. But if you don't know anything about it, maybe you don't want to listen to this, or if you don't care, then stick around. But we are going to do our best to not spoil anything major. Actually, we will not spoil anything major.
Yes, Eric and I think you said it right there, where we're going to avoid certain things.
Exactly. And Eric and I are usually pretty good at this point of dancing around what we're talking about. So saying a lot without saying anything.
We can be wonderfully cryptic.
And we will be wonderfully cryptic in this review. Eric, it's beautiful here in Toronto. How you doing?
I'm good, Matt. I'm in a room. It's nice and cold recording with you. I would like to get outside at some points, but we're talking about Thunderbolts. You are Mr. Marvel himself. You also did an episode with Geekcentric as well. We should do a little bit of cross-promotion synergy before we get started with both the virtual press conference and our spoiler-free review of Thunderbolts.
Yeah, you can check myself and Aisha from Agents of Fandom. We jumped over to the Geekcentric podcast because most of their crew is most of the Avengers are off planet. So I went and joined Justin and Aisha to talk Thunderbolts over there. So I mean, it'll be probably a lot of the same stuff I'm saying here. I mean, it's slightly different format. They handle their podcasts a little bit differently than ours, but I had a great conversation with those two dorks. It was three, MCU sickos over there talking about the movie. So I do think you're going to have a little bit of a different conversation between Eric and I, because, why I love talking to you is that we have two kind of very different perspectives on these movies, especially. That's why I think we work in many
Did
different
you say
aspects,
why I like or Wyatt?
Wyatt, you like these movies, and we'll get into that. So yeah, go over there if you want to go hear me even talk about this even more. So but those guys are great and Justin's amazing. There was a funny moment that won't be in their episode because Justin will cut it out, but while we were recording, something I guess in our washroom downstairs fell off of a shelf really high, so it made like a super loud bang, and my wife Nevis just freaked out thinking something happened up here, like something I collapsed or something. So mid-recording, all I hear is Matt like yelling from my wife. Scared the shit out of me, and we had to stop the recording halfway through. It was a very funny moment that no one will ever hear, but
well, I mean, now they'll hear the backstory on this episode.
So if you hear a weird cut halfway through, just remember my wife thought I had a heart attack or something.
Well,
So-
I'm happy that you're okay. I'm also happy that Nevis is relieved, but it would be very funny if Justin decided to put that at the very beginning of the episode with no context.
yeah, just my wife screaming my name and me freaking out, going,
And that
guys,
sound,
I'm like, I'll be right back. I'll be right back. I just have to check. And I'm like, run downstairs because I think she thinks something's happened to me and I think something's happened to her. So, anyways, that was that. Yeah, go check out that episode. And we'll get into it here. Spoiler-free review of the Thunderbolts. I guess just Thunderbolts dropped it's cleaner.
yeah.
Eric, do you want me to kick it off or you? And
Yeah, I feel like you're already kind of warmed up, you're prepared, you're good to go. It's all lovey-dovey with you right now. And I think you're the guy to kind of spearhead this because this is the end of phase 5.
yeah, which feels a bit strange to say. And we've been, if you've listened to any of our other, MCU reviews, most recently with Captain America, Brave New World. You've heard extensively our thoughts on where we are right now in the MCU, maybe in kind of a down period when it comes to what the public thinks about the movies. You still have what I keep saying, MCU sickos that will watch all of this stuff and will be excited for the next thing no matter what. And even the bad stuff is kind of, okay in our eyes and things like that. But I think we're in kind of an ebb and flow period and kind of in that kind of
You're in the valley.
we are in the valley right now.
You're
a
through
little
the
bit.
valley.
So,
Pedro
and I think
Pascal.
especially, yeah, phase 5 has been kind of a pretty good movie, a not so great movie. Pretty good in my opinion. Pretty good movie, not so great movie. So, I'm happy to say that I think this is a pretty good movie. I've sat on it for a little while. I do genuinely really like it. I think it's not perfect by any means, and we will get into that. But I feel like Papa Feige has been kind of listening to both the hardcore fans and kind of the casual fans who still have made the MCU as profitable and popular as it is, to kind of look at what they've done since Endgame and kind of gone, okay, well, it's not completely working. Everything's starting to feel a bit samey, or a lot of these movies feel like they're kind of an obligation without even having a purpose, or it doesn't feel like the people making it really have anything to say other than make another superhero movie in this universe and maybe move the connective plot along by a step. Where I feel like with this movie, they really kind of, and I'll use the word attempted because I don't know if they completely succeeded, but I think they did a good enough job of making one of those kind of Trojan horse-esque movies that has genuine emotion, and has really great characters and an exploration of, self-worth, mental health, self-purpose, and redemption. And I think that we'll get into kind of how that works and doesn't work. And I think it's a very tricky thing to tackle, especially in a populist kind of popcorn superhero movie. But what I do appreciate is that they even went there. And I appreciate the attempt. And some people might go, that's a very low bar. But I'm saying when you're coming off something like Brave New World, which is kind of the complete opposite of what this is, where it felt like so many cooks in the kitchen, no one really had anything to say. We just wanted to make another Captain America movie. We didn't really believe in any of this. And they just put it out. And you could say maybe the same thing about the Marvels and things like that, where Marvels was still enjoyable, but it just kind of was another movie. I think that being said, it felt different watching this, and it's felt like something I hadn't seen in a little while from the MCU, or maybe even ever. I think it felt more like a phase 1, phase 2 movie. I mean that non-derogatory, where it felt a little more ground level, a little bit more practical, a little bit more street level, and doesn't feel like it went bigger than it needed to be. Like, I think it knew what it wanted to do and it gave it its best shot of doing that. And I applaud it for that. I go, okay, you're trying to learn more about these characters and what they're suffering from. And I think it's all stuff that while they're superheroes, you can, I think on a human level, most people can kind of relate, especially I know, and both of us will go into the pros and cons of this if we suffer from mental health issues and different things like that. And I think that I appreciated that a movie in a universe that I really love tried to tackle that stuff, even if it's kind of surface level. Like when I talk about Trojan horse style movies, we just had Sinners come out, 2 weekends ago, which is the one of the shining examples of that.
Well,
Barbie, another
Barbie is
one.
the one that I think kind of reestablished that
Yeah,
term, right? The Trojan
totally.
horse movie.
And Barbie, I think we had similar thoughts of like, I appreciate that what it was doing, but it was the most kind of surface level version
Well, it's
of
still
what.
selling a product, right? Like
Yes.
that's the
And
cynical side coming out.
exactly. And I think you can compare those two movies. I think Barbie maybe does it slightly better than this movie even does. And they're doing very different things, obviously. But I feel like, we covered Tony's PTSD in Iron Man 3 and stuff like that, which is a movie I know both of us love. But this movie really went, okay, let's go do it on a smaller scale. It'll still be, anti-heroes having to save the day, but it's really going to focus on the characters. And when we get to the characters, this very much feels like Black Widow 2, right? And that can be seen as a positive or a negative. I
Well, not
think
even
it's
Black Widow. It's Yelena's movie.
well, that's
Like,
what I mean, and
yeah,
that's what I was going to go into. But you have 3 characters from Black Widow, right?
yeah,
And was Val in Black Widow as well? Yeah, at the very end she
the
was in the
very end.
post
But
credits.
that was a weird
Um,
thing as well because that was during like the pandemic,
yeah,
and so Falcon and the Winter Soldier was supposed to be after Black Widow, but
yeah.
that was before Black Widow.
And so what I mean by that, yeah, you have Yelena, you have Red Guardian, you have Taskmaster, you have Val,
Yeah.
right? Like, and because this very much feels like a Yelena movie over a Thunderbolts movie,
Well, she's the leader of this group.
she is, and I know Sebastian Stan being in this as Bucky is kind of that legacy character they bring in to kind of be that pseudo leader to the people that maybe aren't super familiar with the rest of these characters or don't remember them or whatever. But Florence Pugh is so great that I understand why they center the movie around her. And she is fantastic, but it very much feels
No,
very
she's not fantastic. Pedro Pascal
uh,
is
yeah,
fantastic.
she's very great and she's very good. And it's very much a Yelena movie and a Bob movie. But Lewis Pullman's Bob is what they should have called the movie. And I think those two characters are the central characters. And I think that both works as, they're the driving force for all those themes that I've been talking about. But that kind of means some of the other characters sort of take a back seat at times. Like you have people like Olga Kurylenko's Taskmaster or Hannah John-Kamen's Ghost. Or even to an extent, they go in a bit of John Walker's backstory. And I think he gets kind of the B plot, right? Even though it's just kind of thrown in there.
Well, especially because of his relationship even with Bucky, right? Like in
Yeah.
terms of like there's a connection to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
So I think it ultimately works as an ensemble that's feeding this main story between Yelena and Bob. So I ultimately think most of that really works, and I again, do I wish it went a little further? But then I go, okay, it's an MCU Disney, popcorn. It's still supposed to be like a popcorn movie. Like I don't know how deep they could have gone. I do like a lot of the stuff in The Void without going too deep into it for spoiler reasons.
Again, avoiding the void.
Yeah, avoiding the void. But there are some cool Inception-y Nightmare on Elm Street. They're not quite dreams, but it's this different world kind of, stuck in your own nightmare kind of thing.
Surrealist imagery.
Yeah, I did like a lot of that. I do think the last act feels a little bit rushed, where there's a lot of buildup, and then when a turn happens, and then it kind of has to do the superhero thing of like, New York's under attack again. And God, we'll get into what's real estate looking like in the MCU New York. Like, do you think it's still ridiculous? Yeah,
a place. Come on,
you can't buy a 1-bedroom apartment.
It
in
actually
New York
adds
MCU.
to it.
Yeah,
Weirdly.
you want to be. I kept leaning over to you and be like, "There's got to be some guy, and I tweeted this too, of being like, "Ah, man, I got blipped and voided, bro." Like I got blipped and voided. So yeah, I really do like the movie quite a bit. I've sat on it, and as someone, I really kind of connected with what they were trying to say, and I think they do a pretty good job at being this character focused kind of story about that actually has emotion and tries to get into the character's psyche and explores self-worth, redemption, mental health, and stuff like that. So I think it's a solid, really, really solid movie. Probably, we were talking about this, probably the best of phase 5, right? That what
I'd
this
say
the end of
I'd
phase
say the
5.
second best
Um,
in phase
I'm
5.
trying to think.
Guardians 3.
Oh, I love Guardians 3. Yeah, you're right. I would say that
Because that's
Guardians
another
3.
movie that is obviously this is taking some notes from, like it feels like this really is, like James Gunn without James Gunn,
And I
like
think he originally wanted to make this before he went over and made the Suicide Squad, right? And completely
yeah.
changed the trajectory of his kind of career going over to DC. But anyways, I think it's very good coming both from a fan and from someone who wants something a little bit different in MCU movies. And I want them to get back to that point where they don't all feel the same. And I liked that this didn't feel all green screened, and it looked like they tried to do some practical stunts and shoot on locations and stuff like that, which is stuff they did in phase 1 and phase 2. And I appreciated all of that. And it just, while watching it, just felt different than what we've kind of gotten since Endgame, and I appreciated that. And I hope we get back to more of it doesn't necessarily have to be filmmaker focused, because I know we talked about how we loved that they started to, bringing in people like James Gunn and Shane Black, and say what you
Ryan
want about
Coogler, right?
Ryan
With
Coogler,
Sinners
yeah.
right now. It's
Ryan Coogler with the Black Panther movies. I mean, you say what you want to say, but I still love Ragnarok, Taika Waititi, right? Like that's very much a Taika movie. And I appreciated those filmmaker focused movies. The movies that it looked like they were made by, I'm not saying the auteur theory, like one person, it's still a giant team, but what I mean is by the too many cooks in the kitchen thing. Like you could tell Captain America was just meddled with. You could tell the Marvels was just meddled with, right? And if you
even though
just,
Nia DaCosta, I think, is in that category of
I agree,
tour
but I don't think they
filmmakers.
let her do her thing,
Yes.
right? She's even talked about that being like, the movie that came out was not the movie that I pitched or even the movie that I shot. It was like Frankensteined after. And this really feels like a movie that wasn't Frankensteined after. It felt like they had something they wanted to do and say, and they did it. And I appreciated that and really enjoyed it because of that. And I think I'll shut up in a second and let you go, Eric.
No,
But
keep going, man.
my biggest gauge of how, like, of MCU movies, after I finish it, do I want to go see it again? And there's only been a few that in phase 5 that I've actually wanted to go see a second time in theaters. Cause
Brave New World being the first one.
yeah, I saw 5 times. So like even something like I saw Deadpool and Wolverine twice. I know you hate it, and we had a great conversation about that movie. But I really was like, Nevis, you're gonna love this one. I want to take you to see it, and I saw it a second time. Guardians, I'd only seen the one time, and it rocked me because it was right after my mental breakdown, and it was the first MCU movie I hadn't seen on opening night or a press screening probably since phase 1. And it rocked me because of its emotional story, and I really connected with the rocket stuff, and at that time it wrecked me. But things like Quantum Mania, the Marvels, Brave New World, even going back to Love and Thunder, Multiverse of Madness, Eternals, Black Widow, those are all movies that were kind of one and done for me, right? But Shang-Chi, No Way Home, Wakanda Forever, like you can see how it's like then maybe one or two misses, then one, and then one or two misses. So I'm happy that it feels like we're at a point where I think the people looking at what's coming with Fantastic Four, that very much feels like, Matt Shackman had a vision for that movie, and it feels original,
But not the
and
vision.
different. God damn it. I really think we're at a point where it's like, okay, we're listening, we're understanding that we can't just chalk these out and not have a reason to, or have something to say. And I think that could have been a mix of pandemic and strikes and all of this stuff that we were in a kind of a weird spot. But I'm optimistic, and I really kind of I vibed with this movie. I like the crew that they put together. I like where they end up. I think both post-credit sequences, which you should stay for, if you're a huge fan. I think it feels like the first time in a while where it meant something, or it feels like we're going to get immediate payoff to it instead of going, is this going to go anywhere? And like, if we're going to see, Hercules or Star Fox or some shit where you're like, okay, when's the next time we're going to see that character? Where this time I feel like both post-credit sequences and the credits themselves are a lot of fun. So yeah, I've sat on this, and I do want to see it again. I want to go see it with Nevis, and I really, really like it. So Eric, now from your more level-headed critic perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not wearing the Scorsese shirt. I think it's perfectly fine. My biggest problem going into this, or after having watched it, was I didn't feel the emotional payoff that you're talking about with the conversation between Elena and Bob, and the idea of, introducing anxiety and depression and self-worth and self-loathing and deprecation. And a lot of that is very relatable and admirable in terms of how they incorporate this into the movie, narratively speaking. And I think Florence Pugh's performance is excellent. I don't really have any kind of real connection to any of these characters in an investment in them in terms of whether they live or die or what they're doing, because they just don't feel as built up as even in the first Guardians movie, that by the time you get to the end of that first film, Louis Pullman said in the press conference that, they felt like his friends, and that you wanted to go see the movie again to hang out with your buddies. And that, I think, is very true of that movie. And so when you're watching this, I never felt any true connection to those characters on a personal level. I, again, appreciate, I don't think anybody's really bad in this or anything, but in terms of the characters themselves, it does feel like Marvel is taking the leftovers and trying to reheat them and make them into, the next set of Avengers and the next, group of heroes that we need. And with the Avengers Doomsday chair thing that was announced, it kind of takes a little bit out of this film in terms of, I think a lot of people going into this haven't watched that video or don't know the full
I
cast
agree with
for
that.
Doomsday. But we're talking about it from the perspective of, if you're coming to this show and listening to it,
You probably do.
You probably do. So that kind of ruins the dangerous elements of it in the sense of okay, we kind of know where this is ultimately going, and it doesn't feel like there's that risk. But there's something else that Wyatt Russell said in that press conference that I think really summed up how I felt overall. And that he said there are Steve Rogers is a guy that does things like will jump on a grenade and protect people, for being selfless and doing it because he wants to help. John Walker is the kind of character that does it, but it's based on motivations of other people are watching him do it, and it's a press moment. I almost feel Thunderbolts is John Walker in terms of that kind of, it's talking about these things and it's addressing, mental health and anxiety, but also this is coming at a point where Marvel is not cool anymore. And the movie
I'll push back on that.
No. It's not as cool as it once was.
Oh, sure. That's a more fair statement.
We've been talking about, you just talked about it, post Endgame.
But those are two different statements.
There's been this rudderless feeling of movie fans, audiences aren't really connecting to the MCU the way that they were through, phases 1 through 4, right? Because it felt like there was a buildup. You had to see everything. Also, there is some conditioning of the Disney Plus aspect of it all, right? Where I think some people are like, okay, well, maybe I can wait until this is available to watch at home.
Sure.
But there is that feeling, that sensation of, okay, we've been talking about it the whole time. We're in a valley. We're in a state of almost morose. And so even in the marketing with the A24 aspect of it all, it's hey, we can be cool too. We can be edgy. We can do this stuff and present all of these things this is an elevated superhero movie in the way that elevated horror gets talked about. That
I
it's
brought that
trying
up too. Yeah.
that it's trying to, as you said, be grounded. Obviously Eternals shot outside of
The soundstage. Yeah.
sound stages, but this movie at the beginning has this relatively simplistic but emotionally impressive stunt and performance by Florence Pugh. It's also been talked about, so it's not a spoiler, where she's jumping off of the second largest building in the world, and it's more about like the internal dialogue. But when watching all of this, you just feel like, okay, this movie almost wants to recreate its image and bring Marvel back into that state of where they were in Endgame or in the Guardians phase. They want audiences not only to come and see the movie, but they want people to have that respect, that cachet, that credibility that A24 or a Neon or something like that has. And just in that marketing ploy, and even in watching the movie in terms of where it's trying to take the narrative, does feel like it is the equivalent of elevated horror, but within the superhero realm, and that it's trying to do more than what it initially maybe was aspiring for. But also the references that you're making to Inception, A Nightmare on Elm Street, even talking about James Gunn with Guardians of the Galaxy and the Suicide Squad, all of those movies feel more distinguished and have their own personality. And, obviously they have their own influences as well. But this movie feels more like it's all influence, and it doesn't have the teeth in terms of the way that James Gunn's The Suicide Squad talks about America and how oppressive it is something that's not usually talked about in comic book movies or even just commercial blockbuster fare in general. And it has some teeth, and also it's more colorful, it's funnier, it has a little bit of edge. Obviously James Gunn's also a very sentimental filmmaker, so there are elements there where he does kind of go into saccharine at times, but almost he earns that with the Guardians movies and with the Suicide Squad. Here I never felt that. I just thought like, oh, okay, this is a fairly influences on its sleeve kind of movie that acts as though we're doing something grander because we're talking about issues that are important to people. And then I also started to think, oh, well, and I can't believe I'm giving the Russo brothers credit, but I'm going to. This also was covered in a more interesting way, and a very, dare I say, subtle way for Marvel movies. I think Thor's storyline of self-worth and depression in Infinity War and in Endgame specifically, in terms of him getting that the hammer back and feeling of worth, that's pretty impressive. Like, that to me feels like it's not trying to draw attention to itself in that way, and that's almost just like a little character moment, but still feels extremely important to how he is developing, and that loss of the good guys lost, the bad guys won, and you feel as though you're not worthy of something, and that you have the imposter syndrome. That does it so much better than I think Thunderbolts does, the entire running time of Thunderbolts, because it's trying to extend that and make it more, but because it is also within the confines of not just simply a comic book movie, but also a commercial blockbuster, it can only do so much. And so like I'm starting to understand, like, do you remember that news that breakfast news show where Larry David tackled Elmo and got really mad at Elmo?
Yeah.
It's almost like that a little bit for, I think, for some people, where like Larry David's a man in, I think, his late 60s, early 70s. Imagine a puppet telling you how to get through depression and anxiety, and it just feels a little bit condescending in that way.
I don't know. I push back on that shit because I just
but
feel
you
like
can't, because that's how you feel.
Yeah, I
I
know.
feel differently to
No,
that.
I know
So
that.
I'm not
But
saying that like everyone feels that way, but in terms of how I felt watching it, it just felt okay. It's telling me these things, and it's dressing it up in a way that goes against its own conversation. And you can compare it. It also is very similar to Joker, where it's like for a comic book movie, the first Joker, not Folie à Deux, uh, for a comic book movie, it's doing something radically different. But if we are to compare it to every other film, like just without the genre
Mhm.
element of it, and say like, oh, how does this compare to Taxi Driver, King of Comedy? Then it is not a ripoff, but it is very much taking those influences and can't be considered really original. And that's the same thing with Thunderbolts, where yeah, you can look at it from that point of view of like this is focused more on this one specific thing. But if we look at it in the context of taking that away from the comic book side, like we've talked about Inception, Nightmare on Elm Street, other films that have dealt with depression, and even within, not Marvel, but the DCEU, well, even within Marvel with the Thor thing, it feels like, okay, it's not completely there. It didn't win me over the way that the Suicide Squad did, because going into the Suicide Squad, I had really no expectations other than, oh yeah, now they're just taking James Gunn, the guy who did Guardians, and they're trying to do that to recover from how awful Suicide Squad was. And so when you're watching this, I just kind of felt, oh, we're getting more of Guardians, we're getting more of Suicide Squad. The performances are very good. I think Wyatt Russell is hilarious.
Yeah, I
Like
laughed a lot.
there's
I
there's there's moments that very much feel like he's obviously broy, but like there's like a bit involving cactus berries where it's just like there's that idiosyncratic nature to it. And I do think like everybody's talented in it, but it almost feels a little bit like watered down too. Like even in its look, how muted it is. There's just something where it feels not even that it's trying too hard, but it just doesn't get across the finishing line the way that Guardians did, or the Suicide Squad did, or any of those films that it's trying to reference, or even just Thor's own arc in the Avengers films. So yeah, I don't dislike the movie. I think like there are moments in it that are well done. I like the idea and the conceptual elements of it. It's just it's really difficult when you're tackling subject matter like this, and everybody will have a different reaction to it that
totally,
has
yeah.
suffered from mental health and illness, and the people that love it and feel like they're connecting with it, that is excellent. Like that is wonderful, and I don't mean to take that away from anybody,
No, and
but I
it's
can
you're
also understand the frustration of being like, oh, this feels very one note in terms of
and
how it's
that's
handling this.
I mean, movies are subjective, right? And that's what the Elmo
Definitely.
thing, what I meant is that, like, I think if it's mostly harmless, then I don't think it's hurting anyone. And that cynical point of view of like, okay, it's a puppet, but if Elmo's helping people by talking about it and it gets to them in a different way. And that's what I mean by these Trojan horse movies of these people who are going to see these that might not see this type, because unfortunately, people only see a couple movies per year, or you're only into a certain type of movie. Maybe people don't see all of those movies that you would love them to, Eric. You would love them to see all those different things
But that's the
that
thing.
you're
It's it's
mentioning.
it's it's the
It's
marketing, and maybe it's not the film's fault entirely, because maybe this is
yeah,
more from a marketing point of view. But it is inviting that criticism of like, oh, well, you are comparing these movies or referencing these films in absolute cinema. Like, so I think you have to be a little bit more critical towards the filmmaking, the marketing, the Disney kind of component of it, because like, well, if you're referencing a different man, I think Marvel audiences should see a different man. It's not just simply,
where are they referencing it? I'm
so
curious.
there's an ad for About Cinema, Absolute Cinema, on it's a real Marvel Studios ad that says the actors from Midsommar, A Different Man, You Hurt My Feelings, the cinematographer of
Right.
Green Knight. And so when you do that you do open criticism up for that. And that's maybe not on the filmmakers side of things, but that is, I think, on the bigger
Yeah, and again,
industrial
to each
complex of
their
it.
own,
So
because to me, I like that it went there, and I think that it yeah, mind you, it doesn't completely work, and I think that it is a tricky thing to tackle. But I just saw it from a different perspective. I thought that I'm surprised at how much by the end of it. Yeah, I didn't cry like I did in Guardians. I think James Gunn's a better filmmaker than Jake Schreier, but I was surprised at how much they did get me to care about this group. Like I really did like, I mean, I like John Walker from Falcon and Winter Soldier, and I just like Wyatt Russell.
He's
But I
so much
actually,
his father's son, you know,
oh,
like
he's
it's,
great. I just the Russells in general, but I think he's like, I was one of the only people in the theater, I feel like, laughing at every single thing that he did.
oh, he's such an
I just,
asshole. Like, and
yeah,
that's what
that's why
makes
it's so
him
much
great.
fun. Right. And then, I don't know. I think it earns all of that stuff, but again, to each their own. Like I did like the look of the movie. I liked Son Lux's score. I like that they were trying to go there, and I think they mostly succeeded. And I don't think that I think you just got to compare it to. You can't compare it to you can. I get everyone's going to do it differently, but I think it mostly works. And unfortunately, I know you thought it was okay, but
But even within Marvel, I think you can compare it within other Marvel movies, and the formula of Guardians, the formula of, you know, that team up thing has been done better in the MCU, even within this phase. I think, like, I was mixed on Guardians 3 because it did feel like we were just getting the obligatory third film. But when I look at what the craft is in that movie and what Gunn brings to those films, there's just something about those movies that have a little bit more investment in character, in story, that feel earned. And obviously that's the third in a trilogy. But even the first movie, you know, when we always talk about this when movie night was around, like we talk about like, oh, a talking tree and a raccoon, like
and it
like
made
is
you care
Marvel.
about them by the end. And this
Yeah,
movie, I understand what you're saying, but I guess because what I liked about it is taking these reject characters and putting them together, and it's doing exactly what you're saying, where
Which
it's like, I
is
don't
also
care about,
Suicide Squad, right?
which I guess, but those characters were all new, where I'm saying I like
No,
the idea
no,
of
no, no,
taking,
no, no, no. I'm pushing back on that.
oh,
They
sorry,
weren't all
Suicide
new.
Squad. No,
Yeah,
I thought you meant Guardians. Sorry,
no,
I misheard you. You
yeah.
mean the Suicide Squad?
And Suicide Squad. Like both of those movies were taking the misfit ragtag group of people doing the
Yeah, but
dirty
those go
dozen
back to the
thing.
comics. That's the exact same. They're the exact same team. Marvel and DC
Yeah.
just are mirror images of one
Which
another,
is
right? Like,
funny because like usually it's the other way around, right? DC or DCEU at the time was always trying to catch up with Marvel.
but it's the snake eating its own tail thing, because it was
Definitely. I'm
inspired by Guardians, and then
Yes.
then he went over into this, and then this is like, okay, let's do our Suicide Squad, which was
Yes.
inspired by Guardians, and I
But
get
then
that.
I think Marvel also got a lot of criticism, if we're talking about Black Widow, is that they didn't have a female-led superhero movie until Black Widow.
Yeah.
And DCU was, I can't believe I'm defending DCU, you know, did Wonder Woman beforehand. And it wasn't until Wonder Woman was a success that they were like, okay, now we need to do
Mhm.
this. So there, I think there is, like, I agree with you. And obviously you are a far more sort of, you know, you have the knowledge and background in comic books, but just looking at it from the perspective of, okay, Thunderbolts, I think to me feels like a little bit, again, like you're microwaving leftovers, because we've done this better with Guardians and we've done this with the Suicide Squad. And so, you know,
I
their angle here is to find the interior terror, right? The elements of, you know, self-worth and imposter syndrome and anxiety and depression, and all those things are worth talking about, and even grief and struggling with things. But that's also where like the elevated aspect of it comes in, because I feel like we've gotten to a point where this
What's
doesn't feel,
wrong with trying to be elevated though? Like,
I'm not saying there's anything wrong. I
yeah,
just feel like we've gotten so much of it that it doesn't feel
right.
as much of a breath of fresh air as maybe it would
Sure.
have, say, 2 phases ago,
Yeah, well, I
right?
like at this point in this universe, even what we're talking about in a meta sense of what's going on in the MCU and how people are feeling about it. And then if you even think about it in universe and since Endgame, how what these characters are. And I like the idea of that everyone's kind of just gone away, and Earth doesn't really have Earth's mightiest heroes anymore. And you have these pockets of, yeah, we saw in Brave New World and stuff like that, what's going on. But I like the idea of a bunch of rejects in this world having, they have no one else and they have to go to them. And I like bringing random legacy characters. And I agree with you that not everyone's given their due. So it feels a little bit,
And
I
that
guess,
happens with ensemble movies like this, right?
yeah, like Ghost is kind of, and I was talking about this on the Geek Centric podcast, and they brought up some good points, Aisha and Justin, being like, we already had their stories in other movies, so they focused on different people. But then I'm like, okay, well, then they're just there for that kind of needing to put a team together thing, right? And
they're just extra
um,
bodies at that point. They don't feel like they're any new
like
development within the
even
story.
Sebastian Stan is probably really only in this movie for the marketing, right? Like, if you look at this team, and Florence Pugh can sell a movie, I'm not saying that she can't.
Well, this is
but
her first. I don't know yet, because like she's obviously she's super talented. She's an Oscar nominee from Little Women. We know who she is. I think
that's true.
I think film people do, and obviously like Marvel doesn't need an actor to sell the brand.
No, it's the brand. Yeah.
But if it was her by herself, I don't know. And not because she's
And
not
that's my
great and
point.
she doesn't deserve it. But I look at like, I think it's going to be really interesting with, and it's a different movie, but Ballerina. I think that will be interesting to see how that does. Like, obviously the reshoots.
Well, there's a lot of John Wick in the marketing now, right? Like,
yeah.
And that's what I mean by the Sebastian Stan of everything is like, I think when you look at this team, it's like, can we sell a movie with Yelena Belova, John Walker, Taskmaster, Red Guardian, and Ghost? And you're like, no. So you have to bring in a legacy character, and the one that makes the most sense with Bucky dealing with a lot of this same kind of.
Well, he's a mirror reflection of those characters.
That's what I mean.
Anti-hero.
And when you look at legacy characters, someone who's been in since phase one, Sebastian Stan's, star is only getting brighter with.
He's an Oscar nominee now, right?
Yeah. So I feel like him being in the movie is for that reason. It's kind of like when you put Tony Stark in Spider-Man. You don't necessarily need, or you have Doctor Strange. It's that connective tissue to the previous phases and the previous universe stuff. And you kind of sell it on being like, here's the character that you really love. And Spider-Man didn't really need help. You know what I mean by like different team ups and different things.
Yeah.
In
some do
MCU
though.
movies.
Some do. I think this is like a clear case of they needed someone to be the old guard and to kind of bring that character in, even though babysitter Bucky Barnes doesn't really have too much to do other than thematically connecting to the storyline. And I like Sebastian Stan now quite a bit because of A Different Man, which I hope anybody listening to this that hasn't seen it gives that movie a shot. But yeah, there is that feeling of though, like, okay, the branding is the star, the studio is sort of the IP is what people are coming here for, but we're also getting to a point where there is a bit of comic book burnout with movies like that. And so what is going to be really fascinating this summer is seeing if both Fantastic Four and Superman can reignite interest and also kind of bring in not only the new phase for Marvel, but also start the new form of DC. And so that's where I think like even that comic book fatigue is still weighing on me a little bit with this one, where I'm all for a film that explores something a little bit deeper, even if it still is on a very shallow phase, but it's also harder when it doesn't feel as original within the comic book realm as it once did. And I think there are other movies like the Guardians films that have done a lot of this better. Iron Man 3 you mentioned, like that I think handles PTSD in a way that's surprisingly refreshing and not like obviously authentic or truthful, but like it just feels like, okay,
for that universe,
for that universe, it brings it all up. And this is what that's trying to do, but it's like, okay, we've already done a lot of this stuff. And yeah, it's the performances, I keep saying this, but the performances are all pretty solid. Like nobody's really bad in this film. Like there's nothing that I would say like, oh, that's a bad performance, or like I think like even Lewis Pullman like is really good in this movie in terms of selling anguish and pain and he's also wonderful in a movie called The Starling Girl, and so like he's doing good work. And obviously Top Gun Maverick, playing another Bob. He's got the market cornered in Bob's, but there is something about like the performances themselves that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting and are really helping to get you invested in them, the actors, and not maybe necessarily the characters. Like I care
Interesting.
about Florence Pugh. I don't necessarily care about Elena.
I don't know. I think this movie did a good job for me personally to get me to care about some of these characters more. I think there's for me, John Walker, there's, you know, a, a moment early in the movie where they go over what he's struggling with since the events of Falcon and Winter Soldier. And it's not super subtle, but I do think people will miss it just because of how people watch movies. But in his first sequence where it's sort of a flashback, sort of not, you'll see when you see the movie.
Well, it's
And
in the
just
trailers too.
that moment is, yeah. And then
Yeah.
him just looking over the ledge as that happens afterwards, and just like um things like that. Like I did care more about all of these people by the end of it. Like I would have said before this, I
Well,
don't
especially
give,
Taskmaster.
yeah, Taskmaster at the top of that list. No, but someone like Ghost, which I said like doesn't have much to do in the movie other than kind of just be part of the team. I'll admire her a lot more than just being the villain from, Ant-Man and the Wasp, which is a movie I did not care that much. I'm kind of hard on the Ant-Man movies that I don't love them, but this did wonders for me to get me to care about Yelena even more, to get me to care about John Walker even more, and even to an extent Red Guardian, because I just thought he was like a wonderful presence in the movie with Yelena and that father-daughter kind of stuff. And then with Bob, the introduction of a new character and the visual metaphors that they're playing with. Mind you, it's tricky again to tackle all of it, and you can say whatever you want about how they do that. I think it makes for an interesting character, and how that all kind of plays out, I think, is kind of interesting. That we haven't talked much about Julia Louis-Dreyfus. I would say that, just to wrap things up, and we'll bring in some of the press conference stuff at the end here. I know we sprinkled it through this review. Val is a character that I'm still not completely on board with. I know they're trying to do the Nick Fury thing. Her intentions are somewhat similar to Fury, because I would say Sam Jackson's Nick Fury, yes, he was part of the government. Yes, he was trying to save the world. It was his tactics that maybe tiptoed of whose interest is he out for kind of thing, but he was always still more on the heroic side of things. Where I
He's
think,
more Steve Rogers again,
yes,
and he is more John Walker.
Walker. Yeah, that's exactly it. They're mirror kind of characters doing the same thing with almost the same goal of protecting, you know, the our planet basically from villains, but her herself at times is doing sketchy things. And I think she's more villainous, obviously, and a little bit more blatant in all of that.
Well, she's
I think
Tulsi
how
Gabbard. That's the thing. Like
yeah,
the way that they make
yeah.
her look in like the impeachment hearings. And that's like the problem I have. It's like it doesn't have the teeth to really deal with some of that stuff in a way that you can tell it's like not too much, because we don't
It's
want
dipping its
to
toe, but it's not
we don't
jumping
want
into
to
the pool.
anger
Yeah.
everybody, because we
Yeah.
want this to be as wide of a a success in demographics and political ideologies as possible. But it is there, like the hearings, like having Wendell Pierce, who's going to be in James Gunn's Superman next, and Chris Bauer as Holt, both Wire actors in there, and obviously Julie Louis-Dreyfus in Veep. And I don't disagree with you. I think there are moments in her performance that I really like. Like
I
like
like
when,
her. I'm
oh,
not saying
she's
that. It's
great,
just with
yeah.
the character. Yeah.
But that's the thing, right? The characters, I think, are second to the actors. But there are moments in Dreyfus's performance where she's trying to calculate things and spin things for her own self-interest and preservation. And when she's figuring things out, or finding a new way to work an angle, just on her face, it is so funny. And like you can tell there's a lot of work going on in terms of like what she's doing to like move those like pieces of like, okay, this has changed, so how do I, approach this, or how can I, make this work in my favor? And like those little moments I think help quite a bit. And we talked a lot, not on this episode, but I think in general we've talked about the televisual quality of Marvel, not just on the visuals, but like the idea that Marvel movies almost feel a little bit like television in the way that they're telling this.
Well, it's serialized storytelling, right?
Yeah. And so when you have someone like Julia Louis-Dreyfus in this role, you really also think about it, because obviously she's more known for Seinfeld and Veep and things like that. So those kind of, and having like television actors in smaller roles, you can't help but think like, oh, this really does feel like television is on the big screen, and television now is trying to mimic movies. So it's a weird like kind of switch between the two, and this weirdly does feel at times like it could have been done as a mini series. Like there are
and you might have
elements
had a
of
little
it.
bit more time to. It's so funny because there'll be Marvel TV shows that everyone said should be movies, and there'll be movies that people
Yeah.
said should have been TV shows. So like, do we want a whole episode on what Ghost has been up to
No,
since?
we don't. I'm still
Like,
happy
so
that it's a movie, but I do feel like, oh, this almost felt like this could, because I mean, you're even hiring, the guy who directed a TV show,
yeah,
Beef,
with Beef, yeah.
to
And you had
make this
the
into a movie,
they even brought in one of the writers too, I believe,
Yeah.
right? And then, yeah, no, I totally understand what you're saying. And much like with Sam Jackson, I think Julia Louis-Dreyfus is bringing a lot of herself into that role. And
I
I
think
do
she's
think
a
that
better
she's
actor
funny.
than Sam Jackson, though. I gotta say.
Sure.
I think Sam
I do.
Jackson's a movie star, but Julia Louis-Dreyfus, like you look at her work and You Hurt My Feelings,
Absolutely.
Tuesday, Enough
No.
Said, she's great.
Sam Jackson's perfect for that character.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, but I agree with what you're saying. And then with Geraldine Viswanathan, and I guess we can kind of bring in some of the cast changes that they made too. She plays Valentina's assistant.
Yeah.
Kind of a nothing role. And we were talking about that role was originally going to be Io Edebiri, and then Stephen Yeun was going to play Bob.
And that's also a Beef connection too, right?
Yeah, a Beef connection. And how many times they call Sentry invincible. I'm like, maybe that was one of the reasons as well, of just being like, Stephen Yeun as that character, I would have been too similar to Mark Grayson to me, like especially with some where Invincible goes in some of the seasons that you need to catch up with, Eric.
Which I will.
I don't know. I'm kind of glad that they kind of made the switch. I love Stephen Yeun, and I do think that I
think he still would have been good, though. I think like
I
Stephen Yeun's
agree.
one of those actors that like
that would have just been distracting to me.
Brings nuance. Not to say that Lewis Pullman doesn't bring some nuance to things, but Yeun is one of those guys where it's like every time you see him in a movie, like there's so much going on in his characters that even for like something like Mickey 17, like it's like you could spend the whole film watching him.
Is that what he dropped out for? I forget what it was.
It probably was, or maybe he has something else going on right now.
Either way, he would have done a good job. I just would have
Yeah.
found the Invincible comparisons distracting.
Well, you were talking about like, living in New York, if like it'd be cheaper to live there now because of everything that's gone on. You have a character named The Century, which is very close to Century 21, which is a real estate
this
company.
morning, I literally went and dropped off my first and last month's rent to Century 21.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to bring in from the press conference? I think a lot of the stuff we were talking about, you could tell that the actors, that's what they really focused on, right? Like they all talked about how this story was trying to do something a little bit more elevated, that was trying to kind of get into the psyche and really focus on the characters. And I think you could really hear that in everyone talking about it, that they really felt like, I think why they all probably wanted to do this and reprise these characters is that they could go a little bit deeper into those characters, because in those other movies, they were more pure superhero movies. And I know we learned a lot about John Walker in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We learned a lot about Yelena in Black Widow, Bucky over the last 15 years, Red Guardian also in Black Widow, things like that. But you could tell that they all kind of wanted to focus on that redemption, the mental health aspect and things like that. And I found it very interesting hearing everyone
Well, it gives them more to
talk about
do,
that.
right? Because like that's what David Harbour said in that conference, is that usually those movies don't give actors the opportunity to chew on character. They're usually just told to like stand on an
And
X
say
or a
their
spot and
lines.
say their line and
Yeah.
have a reaction or something like that. So no, I do appreciate that. And like even David Harbour, like he's one of those guys that I think like is in that Pedro Pascal territory of being overexposed a little bit, and sometimes like he really is obviously meant to be immature and like he's inept in a lot of ways, but there are little moments that I appreciated. Like there's a bit where he's cleaning up his place before Elena comes in and he uses
Dish soap.
dish
Yeah.
soap instead of mouthwash. Like that I kind of liked. I almost wish there was more of that, because like that almost weirdly reminded me of Yama Kletsera, when Liam Neeson is stirring his coffee in nonstop with a toothbrush because he's been
Yeah.
living in his car. Shit like that I enjoy. I like little weird like character choices like that. I don't. It sounds like I've been overly negative. It's a perfectly fine movie. Like it's just
Yeah.
it's well done for what it is. It's well made. I the intent is there, and the appreciation of like everybody taking this not just seriously but respectfully. Like it's there, but it just feels like, okay, well, we've seen this before, and it's not really anything truly new or exciting or even groundbreaking, because Marvel has done this, and other superhero movies have done this. It just almost feels like another building block to something else that we're coming towards. And the actors are good. The nothing is inherently wrong about it, but I haven't really thought a lot about the film since watching
Interesting.
it.
Yeah,
So
that's fair. And my only, as someone who's a little bit more positive on it, is that I understand that it's something that we've seen before, but I'm taking the approach as someone who is a huge fan of this universe and all, the 36 movies or whatever we've gotten. I appreciate that they're getting back to that. And I know you could
they're
say it's as
trying. I
recently
appreciate that too.
as recently as Guardians 3, sure. But I mean, like, to me, this brought me back to even earlier MCU stuff when I started to fall in love with the universe, or even, phase 2 had its up and downs, just like we're in right now. But I just kind of appreciated that while it maybe isn't wholly original,
Wyatt.
that it, that, that I appreciated that they were getting back to that. And I don't need it to reinvent the wheel every single movie. It can feel familiar, which is actually kind of comforting sometimes, and it reminds you of why you liked a lot of these movies, and you're just seeing it with a new group of characters that and then going into why they're struggling with things, all wrapped in this kind of MCU superhero wrapper. And I think coming from someone who really, obsesses almost over the character interactions in the universe and where it's going next. And, we'll talk about all this in a little mini spoiler cast where we talk about, the credits, the post credits and things like that. I want to do maybe like a 15-minute to 20-minute thing with you right after this, Eric, that we'll post when the movie's actually out. But I think that is why that stuff doesn't bother me as much, if that makes sense. Of like, it's not giving it an excuse or anything like that. It's just what I'm looking for from these movies is maybe a little bit different than
You're
what
looking for a little
you're.
beef on the bone.
There you go.
But
And then yeah,
I will say this. I really like appreciate everything you're saying and the enthusiasm that you have for it, and like that to me makes me feel good that like it does connect with people, and if it helps to destigmatize mental health, you know, conversations and being open to having these conversations, that is a benefit. And I'm not even looking for something that's always reinventing the wheel. It's just that we've gotten a lot of stuff that's very similar, in the same way that elevated horror always deals with grief and loss
yeah.
and depression.
And
And
we
it
got a
just
lot of it at one point too. And I
exactly. So
understand
like when you see Until Dawn, you're kind of like,
that.
oh, it's nice just to
Well,
get
yeah.
something that's weirdly,
It's
shallow. But this is the other thing though. I think I like this movie more than Deadpool and Wolverine. because I hated Deadpool and Wolverine, despised it. But I had a stronger reaction to Deadpool and Wolverine. Like I actually had
You're more
things.
indifferent here, where
Yeah,
that
this to me,
brought
this is
something out
mid
of you.
Marvel.
Yeah,
This is mid Marvel, and that's
interesting.
not necessarily anything wrong. And I would still rather watch this than Deadpool and Wolverine again. But the visceral reaction I had to Deadpool and Wolverine was a stronger feeling, and one that felt like, oh, I could have this really, you know, obviously opinionated but strong stance on it. And it's like it brought something out in terms of that conversation we had.
Where this just felt
was,
like another movie that you watched and you won't really think that much about.
yeah. And I think like what I'll take away from it, Florence Pugh is great. She's always been great. She's awesome in everything. I like a lot of the people that are involved that have done great things in other places. It's fine. You know?
Okay,
I still
we're gonna
recommend
live.
it.
We're gonna live. I'm live ranking this to wrap up this part of the podcast before we don't do ratings anymore on this show. But I will tell you where it's gonna end up on my MCU ranking.
I still got to watch
Okay.
Agatha All Along. So
Ooh, wow. So you're not you haven't completed the MCU, where I just, even the stuff I don't even want to watch, I have to watch and finish it.
see,
That's where
sickness.
the place
that
I'm
truly is the sickness. That's your void.
that is my sickness for sure. I will watch no matter, like, even when this universe is long dead in the ground and they're still just pumping them out, I will watch every single thing. I've just committed this far. Where with Star Wars right now, I'm at a weird point that I don't feel super motivated to watch Star Wars stuff, and it feels very weird. Like,
Andor is the exception, I think, to the rule.
I know, and I want to because of that, but I feel like I did get to a point where I was burnt out on Star Wars, or that like I didn't feel that spark that was in me. Like even with
even
the
the
re-release
announcements of the movies, right?
yeah, I know it's hard because a movie hasn't come out in a while, which I think is a good thing because I want distance in between the movies because I want them to feel like big events. But with the TV stuff, I just kind of got burnt out. And even with Andor season 2, I know it's going to be excellent, but like I didn't get back to Skeleton Crew, and that's so unlike me, right? Like I'm usually like the guy that needs.
Have you watched
to
all
watch.
of Daredevil?
Yes, I have, which
Okay.
I did enjoy quite a bit. I remember I watched the whole thing to review.
Right.
Think,
Yes.
then,
Yes. See, I haven't gone back to that either.
which is like the opposite. Andor, that was you, right? You watched it, and okay, so we're gonna rank this. It's going up above Black Widow, above Love and Thunder, above
Belova?
Falcon and Winter Soldier, above Multiverse of Madness, above the Marvels. Now we're getting into the, even though I really like this movie, this just shows you how much I just am a sucker for MCU stuff. I'm at number 28 right now, which it could go higher, but I'm at that point of mid Marvel, to your point. So we're not that far off. It's just our rankings are going to be vastly different, but
Mine's higher so far.
That range of, I have Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one, at 21, right?
Whoa,
so like,
wow.
And I don't love Guardians 1 as much as other people do, but here's the thing, Eric, that's still a 4-star movie for me. So you got to think there's 20 movies and above.
Is it a 4-star or a forced star?
So like, do I like this more than Avengers Age of Ultron? Yes. Do I like this more than Hawkeye? Now we're getting into, I think I do like it more than Hawkeye. Do I like it more than the first
Elaine
Avengers
is in Hawkeye
movie?
too, right?
Not the first Avenger, but the first Avengers movie. And that's where I don't think I can put it any higher, right?
No.
Like I liked Thunderbolts quite a bit, but I can't put it above the original Avengers movie. And I might even struggle putting it ahead of Age of Ultron because like I kind of have a soft spot for that movie now. But I think as of right now, I'm putting it at number 23, just under the Avengers. So right now I have Avengers Endgame. I'll just go 1 to 23 where it is. Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man No Way Home, Avengers Infinity War, Spider-Man Homecoming, Loki, that includes mostly season 2, but also just seasons 1 and 2 of Loki. Civil War, Captain America Civil War, Thor Ragnarok, number 7, WandaVision, number 8, We love Iron Man 3 in this household. Iron Man 3 is at number 9. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, my favorite Guardians of the Galaxy movie, at number 10.
Crazy.
You're going to love this. Deadpool and Wolverine at number 11.
Get the fuck out.
Shang-Chi at 12. Black Panther 13. Wakanda Forever 14. Far From Home 15. Iron Man 1 16. Winter Soldier 17. She-Hulk. I fucking loved She-Hulk. Thinking back on it, I really do like She-Hulk and Tatiana Maslany. Maybe a little high at 18. Guardians Volume 2. Guardians Volume 2 at 19. Ms. Marvel at 20. Guardians at 21. Avengers 22. Thunderbolts 23. I'm very curious. I'm going to do a rewatch. I'm a psycho. Before Doomsday, and I'm going to actually like put it into my calendar to make sure that I stay on track and do it on a weekly basis to try to hit every single movie leading up and TV show before Doomsday. And I will re-rank it when I do that. And I always find it interesting when I do a rewatch because that ranking completely changes. There's certain movies I haven't seen in years, or maybe I have a different perspective because I'm older, or maybe I have a different perspective because of where the Marvel universe is at that moment in time.
Your love of Secret Invasion will grow.
Yeah, will only grow from number 46, right above Eternals. So anyways, that's my live ranking. How high did you put it? Where'd you put it?
I actually I like it more than you. I put it at 22.
Oh, well, that's about the same.
Do you want me to read mine from 1 to 20?
If you want, please.
Yeah,
I would like to hear it. Yeah.
My number 1 is Iron Man 3. I
love that. I love that. I love it.
Number 2 is Spider-Man Homecoming. Number 3 is Black Panther. Number 4 is WandaVision. Number 5 is Guardians of the Galaxy, the first. Number 6 is Loki, seasons 1 and 2. Number 7 is Avengers Endgame. Number 8 is Iron Man. Number 9 is Spider-Man No Way Home. Number 10 is Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Number 11 is Spider-Man Far From Home. Number 12 is Ms. Marvel. 13 is She-Hulk. 14 is The Avengers. 15 is Shang-Chi. 16, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. 17, Thor Ragnarok. 18, Avengers Infinity War. 19, Captain America the First Avenger. 20, Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness. 21, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And 22, Thunderbolts.
It's really interesting because it's so funny, our reviews of Thunderbolts coming from two completely different angles that aren't actually that far apart when you look at it, when you kind of compare it to the rest. And even that top 22 that you just listed, not like, has a lot of the same movies, right? Like just a slightly different order of them. And yeah, there's some outliers of I really like a certain movie much more than you and vice versa, right? But for the most part, pretty similar when it comes to those 22, 23 films. And it seems like we're pretty in line with that bottom half too. Yeah. So it's interesting. I think that's really fun. So either way, I do think it is 100% worth going to see in a theater. I think if you're comparing it just from the last movie, light years ahead of Brave New Year.
Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
Come
so
on.
If you went and saw that in theaters, what I do think is interesting, because even at the end of the press conference, to kind of wrap everything up, everyone did joke about being like, people do punch each other and shoot each other in this movie, because they were so focused on that elevated nature that we're pointing out of like, we're really getting into the characters and the themes and the mental health stuff and all this stuff, where they didn't really talk about that it's also just a superhero movie. And I'll be interested to see
Red Guardian
how
still looks like Turbo Man.
Yeah. I'll be interested to see what a general audience thinks, because do they want an elevated superhero movie, or does it what Marvel thinks that people want, right? Like, will only the MCU sickos really kind of go, oh, this feels like, I want something like this, where are other people going to be like, I'm curious too with the marketing, Eric, that you mentioned. Does it feel like it's mismarketed a little bit? Mismarketed is the new Disney Plus series coming out, where they're playing it off really just like a superhero action movie, like a, a Avengers movie or a Suicide Squad or whatever, where there's not like a ton of action in the movie. Like there are some good fight sequences and some good explosions, and the void stuff is cool, but it's not a pure, your what you would say is a classic, what we just got from Brave New World. But I know that reaction was very mixed to mixed negatives. So I'll be curious to see what people
My
think.
favorite Aladdin song. Brave New World.
All right, everyone. Thank you. Usually we would do like a where's the MCU going, but I'm going to save that for a little spoiler cast because I feel like the end of this film and the post credits are something that can
The end game of this film, if you will.
Can kind of get its own little episode. So we'll leave it at that. But thank you all for listening. We really, really do appreciate it. I always love talking MCU with my favorite boy, Eric Margin here. So it's always fun.
Also it's just nice that we we have different opinions on the MCU.
No, I think
we can still have a conversation that's civil and like thoughtful and
I always appreciate that you
points of view.
oblige and
I still would see these movies too, and I still enjoy these films, and I should also say I grew up loving comic book movies and comic book stuff, and I still really do, and you care about it not just on the level of the movies, but actually the comic books as well.
Yeah, I don't read much anymore, but
you still pick up stuff.
I'm going to pick up that Fantastic Four issue that they're doing, which is a prequel to the movie. And there's a TVA comic that is sort of, MCU universe, but not really, but
adjacent to whatever going
on. So I want to read that as well. And I want to get back into reading some stuff, but I mean, it's always fun. And I know that as much as, I just obsess over it. I appreciate that you still like to see where I think it comes from an interesting spot.
I'm pod committed, man.
That too. But I think that you're also just interested in the filmmaking, big where movies are kind of thing, right? So like where the MCU going is really where cinema goes too, right? Because it was such a big part of it for the last 15 years. And where it's going in the future can sort of shape what's happening, or maybe, in either way, whether for good or for bad, or if it wanes and doesn't work out, that's interesting to hypothesize about too, right? Of if the choices they're making in the stories will lead to people still giving a shit. And
also just giving people, we keep talking about this or mentioning it, but I think it is really important because obviously the success of Ryan Coogler's Sinners is such an important thing. And I think what gave him the cachet to make something that was original, not based on IP, was Black Panther, obviously Creed as well. But, that's the kind of thing I love. And Ryan Coogler, I mean, he rocks. This guy is awesome.
He's the best, dude.
He seems to have a big heart and cares about people and stuff like that. And that's the thing where even when you get I keep mentioning a lot of the actors in these movies I do like, and we mentioned how unfortunately mislined and maligned She-Hulk was, but seeing Tatiana Maslany in that role and giving her something post Orphan Black that felt like a bigger platform, that's exciting just to see can this help move to the next thing, or help maybe get a project that person's been working on outside of the MCU, the cachet they need to get it made. And so that you have to appreciate as well, right? It's a environment, it's an ecosphere when it comes to these movies. You need them in order to allow the sinners to get made. So
absolutely,
it's all a balance. It's all a balance.
No, I totally agree with that. So yeah, there's I can't wait to talk spoilers. So keep an eye out for that. That episode will be out. We'll post that right as the Thursday screenings start. So when you get out of your screening on Thursday, there'll be an episode waiting for you guys about, the post-credit sequences and the ending of the movie. Thank you all for listening. Please go check out all of our work over on our letterbox, which is Untitled_movies. You can follow us on social media at Matt Rohrbeck and at EM6211. We have some other content that you guys can check out right now. Obviously, please go listen and subscribe over to The Cast of Us, which is our HBO's The Last of Us podcast, where Eric and I break down each episode of HBO's The Last of Us. Eric also has an interview with Steve Newburn, who is a special effects artist who worked on Until Dawn on all the kind of prosthetics and everything in the film. Really cool conversation there. There's like a 40-minute episode out that you guys can check out on that. And a lot more coming. I still want to talk Sinners. We just haven't gotten around to that yet. We really got to do that soon. I want to make sure we do that because that movie is incredible. And what else do we have out right now, Eric? And
we have an interview with David Cronenberg and Sandrine Holt for The Shrouds, which was, a truly like something I've been waiting for my entire life to talk to David Cronenberg. So that was really special. We have an interview for Thunderbolts coming up. Won't say too much more about it right now, but keep posted on the site.
Release day, that'll come out.
We have interviews for Andor with Genevieve O'Reilly and Stellan Skarsgård, and
you have a review for Andor.
Yes, and like you said, like keep paying attention to The Cast of Us, because we're doing this week by week and we're breaking every episode down, and it's a lot of fun. I think television right now is really picking up the slack for film. Not that it's been a bad year per se, but in terms of
slow,
but I mean, Sinners has definitely, ignited or sparked that heat that we need, I think, to kind of get us excited for the summer blockbuster season.
I agree. All right. Thank you again, everybody. Until next time.
Taskmaster fans will not be disappointed.
Bye.